5,
4,
2,
3,
1,
M,
A.
X.
There's nothing cooler than a computer in a movie, and in A View to a Kill, Stacy, one of the main characters, has one of these computers, an Apple IIc, and her and Roger Moore use it to look up some seismographic data that they can then, use as a kind of MacGuffin to get to the next point in the movie that they need to get to.
Let's see what the earthquake center has on it. Just a minor tremor. Measured 2.5 in the Richter scale. Location? That's odd. The epicenter's near Zorn's oil field.
I happen to have a copy of that program here. How did I get a copy of a program from a movie? Well, it's quite simple. Like a Faberge egg, I made my own Forgery. So let's check it out now. I've got this Apple IIc that I fixed up. When I got it, it didn't boot at all. It just had this kind of like graphics glitches on the screen. But essentially it turned out that the 65CO2 processor in the computer wasn't working anymore. So I got a new 65CO2 and swapped it out. And so I thought an awesome way to get to know the machine and to get to have a bit of fun, a bit of cheeky fun, would be to try and almost make the most faithful possible recreation of Stacy's computer program from A View to a Kill, which of course is a program that nobody was asking for, except the truth is I had an awesome time kind of getting to know how to program for the Apple II. So now let's have a look at how I actually made this program. What I tried to do was to make this project as faithful to the version in the movie as I possibly could, to kind of try and figure out exactly how they did it, rather than just saying okay, that's a circle, that looks kind of like it, that'll do. If I came up with a solution that wasn't quite the same as what they'd used in the movie, then I would go back to the drawing board and find another solution to that problem. And that was really cool because what it allowed me to do was actually learn multiple different ways of doing things on the machine until I found the right way. So let's go through the code now and maybe we can see some of those moments. It's written in Applesoft BASIC, as I'm absolutely certain the original movie version for the movie was, because there's a few kind of telltale signs in the speed at which the application runs and the way that it plots and things. Now, when I began writing this program, I'd never written anything for the Apple II before. Obviously, I've programmed for other systems, but not for the Apple II, and I hadn't really ever written anything of any substance in BASIC. The Apple IIc has tons of memory for an Apple II, but still not much compared to what we would normally think of in terms of memory, so it has 128K of memory. And what this first two lines of the program do is they actually load the program into a different spot in memory than it would automatically be loaded into. And the reason why I had to do this was because the program was so long, and I haven't written it particularly efficiently, it's not particularly optimized or anything like that, but it was so long that it was beginning to write over the area in memory where the screen, the data for what is to be displayed on the screen is stored. So I was getting dots on the screen, and also I was wiping out portions of my program whenever I cleared the screen. So this code here just displays my little title screen for the application. I just thought it would be good to have some title text there while it loads rather than just a black screen, because it does actually have to load a bunch of stuff off the disk. First it has to load the disk operating system, obviously. Then it has to load the map image, and I load that image onto high-res page 2, because in the movie, when they switch to the map, it's instant. You don't see the map load or anything like that. And so I could tell from that they must have already loaded it into memory before they switched to the screen. The next bit of code here loads the font into memory, and I'll talk a little bit about how I drew the font on the screen in a moment. The next thing loads the shape table that I use to draw the circles into memory. And this is particularly curious as a newcomer to the Apple II. But the reason why I'm loading this shape table now is because I'm almost certain that in the movie version, they used a shape table to draw these circles here. The next thing that has to happen is the graph lines have to trace across the screen, so the actual lines of the graph are drawn on. The reason why I did this first is because in the movie, that's what happens first. You could see here when Stacy pulls up the screen, the graph lines draw across. So that's what these lines here do. The next thing that I do is I actually draw the graph data. And so I had to actually like meticulously copy these graph positions as best I could as XY coordinates relative to the position of the line to get them to actually draw out on the screen. So that was a bit of fun sort of care and attention that had to be paid there to actually get my graph to be correct. This text beneath the graph here, because I was new to the Apple II, this was the hardest part of the project to figure out, because it turns out that on the Apple II, if you want to draw text on the same screen as high resolution graphics, but you want to put it in like kind of an arbitrary position of your choosing on the screen, that's not actually possible out of the box. You can only position text in a very specific way on the high resolution graphics screen, which is actually by opening a window into the text screen on the high resolution graphics screen that can't move. And that window would actually cover up several lines of the graph here if I had it on the screen. So I knew that that's not how they did it in the movie. So I had to figure out how to actually draw this text on the high resolution graphics screen. And that was essentially one of the very first problems that I had to solve in making this application. And I really wasn't sure how to do it, but it turns out, like with the circles that you'll see in a little while, there's like many different ways in which this could be done. Like there's a few different programs you can get that are for the Apple II that are specifically for designing your own custom fonts and then displaying them on the screen. Somebody on Facebook pointed me towards the Beagle Brothers Apple IIc software package that includes a bunch of fonts and also includes a shape table editor for editing the fonts yourself. And it kind of gives a demonstration of how to put a little bit of code together that lets you draw those fonts at any position that you want on the screen. So what I did was I used one of their fonts and then I just wrote my own code in the application for actually drawing the text at the below the graph here. And what I did was I figured out that the index of the characters in the shape table is related to their order as ASCII characters in the ASCII table of ASCII characters chart, and it's just offset by 31 positions because the font doesn't include all the control characters at the start of the ASCII character set. So what that meant was I could write this little bit of code that iterates through this string here, figures out the ASCII character for each letter in the string, and then essentially chops 31 off that number so that it can get the index in the shape table of that letter. And then what it does is it just prints it to the screen, just like in the movie. So it's funny because it's such a simple thing, you know, you take it for granted, this ability to just draw text anywhere on the screen. But in this mode on the Apple II, you know, these things can't be taken for granted in an 8-bit computer like this. So that was super satisfying to solve that problem. And I learned a lot about the computer by doing it, particularly about shape tables and just, you know, the kinds of things that you can and can't take for granted. I tried several different ways of doing the circle animation. At first I thought maybe it was like a page flipping kind of thing, like there was one screen that had a circle on it and then another screen that didn't, and basically it was flipping between the two pages and redrawing the circles. So I tried that and it did work, but it was incredibly slow. So then I started looking at other ways to draw circles and ways to speed it up. Beagle Brothers have a package for drawing in double high res mode, and you can draw circles really quickly and you can X-draw them, which I'll talk about in a second, which is really good and really helpful because it means you can make them flash really easily. And I got these really slick looking circles drawing, and I thought maybe this is how they did it. Maybe they used an assembly language module in their application to draw the circles really quickly. But I went back to the source material and looked at it again, and I thought, no, it can't be, because the graph screen is not drawn in double high resolution graphics. It's drawn in standard high resolution graphics, and it's clearly using Applesoft to do its drawing. In the end, I realized there's a bit of a clue to how it's done, which is that when you look at these circles, you can see that they're actually drawn in quadrants. And when you actually watch them animate, you can see that they kind of flash as quadrants too. This sort of led me to think that probably what they were doing for these circles is they had actually hand-drawn the circles into a shape table themselves, and they were just recalling the circles from the shape table, which is a really laborious way to make a circle. Very laborious, because you have to actually custom make all the circles of the individual sizes yourself. So super laborious. But the advantage of it is the Apple II can draw from shape tables way more quickly than it will draw something from just like using basic plots. And so what I had to do then was to make my own shape table with multiple sizes of circles so that I could replicate this animation myself. And that is what I did. I used the Apple Mechanic package from Beagle Brothers to actually create different size circles. And I also made a filled in solid circle, thinking that it would be fun to do the James Bond gun barrel sequence with the dots going across the screen. But I never got around to doing that, and I don't know if I will or not. So what this code does is it has a loop that just loops endlessly so that this animation will just run forever with the flashing circles. And then the next thing it does is it steps through 3 of the circles in the shape table, and it draws each of them a certain number of times using the XDraw method in BASIC. And so essentially looks at the location in memory where it's going to be doing its drawing, and it inverts the color. So if the color is black, it will draw white there, and if it's white there, it will draw black there. In one iteration, it draws the white circle, and then in the next iteration, it draws a black circle over the top. So the circle disappears, and then in the next iteration, it comes around and draws the white circle, and so on and so forth. Another little detail that I had to work into this loop because it's in the movie version is a little flashing dot in the center here. For the map, I thought that maybe the text had been plotted on there in a similar method to what I was talking about before on the graph screen. But in fact, when I thought about it a little bit more, I thought, no, probably what happened was this map was made in a graphics application of some sort on the Apple II, and the text was probably typed in that application. And that made me think of MousePaint, which I knew had existed because of my passion for it and research into MacPaint for the Mac. And so MousePaint is essentially like an Apple II port of MacPaint. So for the map, what I did was I actually drew the outline of the coastline here on my Mac, and then I converted it into binary image data for the Apple II so it could be displayed in the high-res graphics mode. And then I opened up that data in MousePaint on the Apple II, and I typed in the text for the city labels in MousePaint, exported it, saved it to disk, and then loaded it up in my application. And that's how I got the map screen here. The main difference, I think, between the map in the movie and the map in mine is in the movie they play this like beep, 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 burp, beep, 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 burp.
Location? That's odd.
So that is how I forged the program from Stacey's computer from A View to a Kill, which was definitely a project that nobody was asking for and that many would consider to be an enormous waste of time, that I found absolute total delight in doing, kind of like a project for no one but myself, and just a really great opportunity to actually learn how to use the Apple IIc. If you want to have a look at this code or download the disk and run it on your own Apple II or in the emulator or somewhere like that, I'll pop a link in the description to my website. And if you enjoyed this video, I do occasionally make these kind of very esoteric paint drying technology computer videos, which are very much the kind of video that I like to watch. So I would encourage you to subscribe if you want to see me tool around with some other kind of preposterous technology stuff. But thanks very much for watching. If you made it this far, pop a comment below, because I can't imagine that there's really anybody out there who wants to see a video this long about recreating an obscure computer program from a rather questionable Roger Moore movie.
X.